As much as I can respect the Viking settlement into Denmark, it's baffling to conjure up how these dudes with hands as big as my head somehow managed to bake butter cookie clarity and stuff it into a loudspeaker. What the heck does that even mean? I don't have a clue, but Craig does. And with a warm welcome back to New Record Day, let's bake some butter cookie clarity. Welcome back to New Record Day. My name is Ron. If you consider yourself an audiophile or a music enthusiast, welcome home. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you know when the next video drops. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Clarity 6.2s that were sent to me directly from Radiant Acoustics. And no, this video is not sponsored. And no, they aren't paying me any money to do this review. And there has been no conversation about being able to keep these loudspeakers in exchange for the review or any of that nonsense. All of my thoughts and opinions are my own. So let's dive in and get started. The Clarity 6.2s ship directly from Radiant Acoustics, and the packaging is thorough double-boxed foam inserts and each speaker wrapped in a cloth bag. Everything arrived in perfect shape. You get the speakers and a manual, but no speaker grills, and that might be a turnoff for some folks. The 6.2s come in a couple of different finishes, and I went with the walnut veneer, which to me looks fantastic butted up against a polished aluminum front baffle. They are pretty compact, 8.7 inches wide, 14.3 inches tall, 10.5 inches deep, and weigh in at 24 pounds each and feel quite solid in the paws. Other finishes include matte black or white lacquer if walnut is not your jam. Either way, they do give off a sense of care and quality, and from what I can see, will serve you well for years to come. For those who decide they need the 6.2s in their life, and I cannot blame them for that, it does come with the responsibility of giving the clarity what they want, and what they want is indeed power. Certainly not the most demanding speaker by any stretch, but these are rated at 85 dB and will dip down to 4 ohm territory. So toss those single-ended triodes on audio gun, and I would suggest throwing something together with some solid-state muscle to get the most out of the 6.2s. By all means, keep the tubes glowing on your preamp, and for this setup, I actually threw the incredible sounding spatial audio Raven in front of the Legacy Audio IV2, which gave me, wait for it, 1,000 watts per channel. Into 4 ohms. And best of all, folks, I had the glory of Lit From Within magic front-loading all that power, and this setup for me was one of the best sounding blends of tube magic and solid-state muscle that I've ever cobbled together. Now, going all tube can work, and indeed it did with the incredibly versatile Galleon TS120 SE, but for me, these 6.2s really seemed to perk up as soon as I gave them some solid state love, and the Raven combined with the IV2 was frightening good with these speakers, and the combo I eventually settled on. Now, if 1,000 watts seems pretentious, and perhaps it is, you could also slide the Eversolo F10 into the driver's seat, and again, that amp paired just fine with the almighty Butter Cookie Clarities. Why do I keep calling them the Butter Cookie Clarities? Well, because Craig, my buddy Craig, kept calling them the Butter Cookie Clarities when we spent some time listening to them, and I can't get it out of my head. As for my front end, I used my trusty Zenith running into my Maydac and used Sense to navigate all the tracks that I listened to during my time with the Clarities. All cables and power cords are from GR Research and Spatial Audio. I found the 6.2s to be a bit of a diva when it comes to speaker placement. The manufacturer does suggest listening to these off-axis, and the listening window might change based on what you crave when it comes to top-end clarity and upper mid-range spark. Of course, I did ignore Radiant Acoustics, and I tried the 6.2s pointing right at me, and after they ripped my head off, I learned my lesson and decided that maybe the manufacturer might actually know what they're talking about. Who would have guessed? Either way, folks, I would advise using the guardrails when it comes to placement and point these anywhere other than directly at your ear canals. After a few minutes of massaging, I landed on letting these shoot well past my shoulders, and I would say probably just beyond 20 degrees. A lot of audiophile-centric stuff did indeed sound wonderful with them pointing right at my shoulders, but anytime that I wanted to boogie with 90s grunge, the Clarity upper mid-range spark got a little too happy for my liking as soon as electric guitars lit up the soundstage. Now, something worth noting here, folks, the room matters, and in the sound shed, I went heavy with diffusion even on the sidewalls. With this configuration, my RT times are well below 300 milliseconds for most of the upper mid-range, and without the help of absorption on the sidewalls, I'm really asking for as much resolution on top as possible, so this is important context if my comments of heads being severed concern you. So, in the event where you do have some absorption on the sidewalls, it's entirely possible that electric guitars will lay down a bit and relax enough for you that you could end up pointing these a bit closer to your ears. Anywho, with that being said, what I like a lot about these speakers is, given their name, Clarity, that even with them pointing well past my shoulders, not only did my center image stay intact, but I still had boatloads of resolution to play with, and this made me very happy as I spent time listening to the 6.2s. As far as placement off the wall, I couldn't give a rat's rear end about trying to invoke a lot of deep bass out of these speakers, and for me, soundstage depth is necessary for me to get my audiophile kicks, so no, I don't have these 2 or 3 feet off the wall, and no, I don't care about boundary reinforcement or SBIR. These guidelines are appropriate to follow for a lot of folks, but here at NRD, we observe and respect those rules, and then we politely light them on fire as we break into laughter. After a number of locations in the shed, starting with just a few feet off the wall, I ended up where I figured, which was actually about 9 feet into the listening room. Now, before my buddy Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner lights the comment section on fire, I will admit that this is not practical for a lot of folks, and I totally understand that. However, I can assure you, as I already did in this video, that for me, with the help of open baffle subs, I will always give up deep bass for a deeper soundstage, and therefore 9 feet into the room is where these things landed, and that's that. Of course, your room will dictate these things, and using LOTS, also known as loudspeaker optimization techniques for soundstage, will walk you through dialing in the 6.2s if you decide to hit the checkout button. But before you do that, we should probably talk about how the heck these things actually sound. So yeah, let's do that. Air and extension, folks. These speakers have that, and for those who have spent more than one video with me, first of all, thank you, and second, you know this is indeed one of the dragons that I'm choosing to ride. The entire tuning of this sound shed is designed to extract all the air and extension that I can get out of a loudspeaker, and ambience is indeed a deal breaker for me when it comes to long-term relationships with loudspeakers. The Clarity 6.2s are named appropriately and will be the cornerstone of this entire review, firing up A Simple Twist of Fate, a drop-dead gorgeous cover of a Dylan classic by Sarah Jarosz. We have a simple vocal and cello being played pizzicato by Nathaniel Smith.
Wished that he'd gone straight, watched out for a simple twist of fate.
Side note, thank you, Craig, my brother from another mother. Anyhow, in this song, they did all the right things in post, and there is a pre-delay on the reverb of her vocals. In most rooms, this might be hard to catch, but in the sound shed, it is downright magical. As she sings and emphasizes the main phrases in the song, you catch the reverb trail after the phrase, and it's panned hard left and hard right of the stage. Now, I have a handful of speakers in for review along with my own collection, and I will tell you right now, Only on one hand can I count the speakers that really excel at bringing this reverb trail to life in such a magical way, and yes, the Clarity 6.2s are very high on that list. And look, it's not just air that they bring to the audiophile party. Splashes, crashes, and anything cymbal related sounds bell-like, ballsy, and very vibrant. The top end of these speakers is definitely a large part of the speaker's charm, and yes, I know a little more lift in the upper harmonics can scare some audiophiles away, and I will tell you, as long as you can massage these into a place and avoid listening on axis, you can make it through a lot of material before fatigue will set in. Which reminds me, and I must mention, for me, I do need to take some breaks with these speakers, and keeping in mind I do have a sensitivity to upper mid-range, I will tell you, without batting an eye, these aren't going to apologize to anyone for telling it like it is, even when the recording is bright. So, keep my placement suggestions in mind and just know that you are signing up for clarity. Like, it's the name of the speaker, for crying out loud. Butter cookie clarity, folks. All day long. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is despite the fact that these were deep into the listening room throughout this review process, I never felt that I compromised the mid-range or mid-bass. A great track for determining this is Dominique Fils-Aimé's rendition of Stand By Me, which sounds very bold and very rich in the lower mid-range. The track begins with just her and an upright bass. When I hear this song with speakers up against the wall, it can be a confusing, bloated mess. With the 6.2s, 9 feet into the room, I had an easy time tracking her vocals and a clear contrast from the bottom of her range to where the upright begins. Now, this track is rather stripped down and simple, but even when switching gears to something like, I don't know, Tool and firing up The Pot, the Clarities had no problem keeping the complexity of this track in check and offered me plenty of separation from all of the information and appreciate what's actually going on throughout the song. Folks, the mid-range is about precision and detail. Make no mistake about it. As my buddy pointed out after hearing them in the shed, these ain't painting sloppy strokes with a roller. No, these are using a detailed brush with the finest of brush tips. So yeah, if watching Matlock and sipping warm milk while listening to Harbess with Grandma is your nightly routine, this is not the kind of speaker that I would suggest plopping down the cash for. Similar as to how I feel about the NX series from GR, the Clarities like going fast. They bring the fireworks and they love showcasing every single detail hidden away in the recording. Now, if that's not your jam, so be it, and pay attention when I get around to reviewing the Zoo Audio DWXs, but for those who do like to go fast, let's see if we have a few more gears left in these bad boys. Part of understanding mid-range is also accepting how the mid-range is conveyed in the stage, meaning, if we were firing up something like Alice in Chains and taking dirt for a spin, please understand this. The Clarities will not ask you which row you prefer. No, they will place you in the front row and politely ask for complaints to be kept to a minimum. In fact, it occurred to me midway through the review process that these speakers might be the perfect choice for folks who love the presence of a horn speaker but can't stand the horn-like sound that comes from a lot of horn speakers. That is to say, if the 6.2s had a presence knob on them, that knob would be set to 11, and with that comes all the fireworks and clarity of the upper mid-range that at times will slap you upside the head without an apology. Later in the measurements, I will try my best to articulate what might be going on, but to be frank with you, the measurements that I took don't really tell me the whole picture as to what I'm actually hearing. Of course, depending on the rabbit hole that we slide into, we could speculate about the sound of AMT drivers, crossover components or caps, the wiring, the binding posts, or we could just play pretend and say, none of that stuff makes any difference and we can go on about our day. Either way, after landing this jet fighter from Radiant Acoustics, I'm calling it as I hear it, and without a doubt, there is a forward presentation that comes with the 6.2's imaging. Some will love it, and some will wish they relaxed a little. Pick your poison, boys, but don't tell me that I didn't mention it because, well, I just did. I could probably talk about bass for the next 4 to 48 weeks, but I'll keep this straight to the point. The Clarity 6.2s have officially taken the lead of the most engaging bass I have heard from a box speaker that uses passive radiators. I don't know how much crack Purify had to stuff into these drivers to do what they do, but my goodness, I am a huge fan. They remind me of what I hear in my encores, meaning there is a lot of bass resolution to sink your teeth into, but even more than my trusty encores, these hit ridiculously low bass and it is intoxicating. While the encores have no issue hitting 50 hertz in my room, 9 feet into the room, the clarities reached into the 40s, 9 feet into the room, and they did it with great authority. And if you need the receipts, that's not a problem. We happen to have those laying around. Taking a look at this in-room response, you can see that the 6.2s do indeed show a linear response all the way down to 40 hertz. Quickly switching to the encores, sure enough, we are looking at a drop-off right at 50 hertz. Now, here is the thing, folks. If a kick drum is what you crave, this graph isn't really telling us all that much, but switching to a spectrogram and focusing our attention on this red mountaintop at 55 hertz, which is the Clarity 6.2, we can see some serious firepower right at the fundamental hit of a kick drum. Switching to my reference encores, well, not so much. So, if kick drums without the help of a subwoofer from a stand mount speaker is your dragon to ride, I must say that the Clarity 6.2s is gonna be tough to beat in that particular category. Now, overall texture, speed, and resolution in bass is another thing, and while there is an abundance of this waiting for you in the 6.2s, this is going to be the one category where the encores will definitely land some serious blows on the harder hitting clarities. But you know what? Let's not overcomplicate this. Both of these speakers offer incredible resolution and bass. Both offer loads of texture and tone. Both of them will allow you to count every single goosebump as you listen to upright basses. But in the end, without subwoofers, the Clarity 6.2s is indeed more capable of serious bass below the belt. And now that I have sold you on the bass of these speakers, it's probably a good time to mention that I am the kind of guy who will crash most audiophile parties that I'm never invited to. For folks who love deep bass, but also like it loud enough to knock down a wall, shake off your partner's clothes, or crack a rib cage or two, the truth is that these speakers do have their limits in this department. When trying some harder to handle tracks that puts the hurt on woofers, I noticed that at higher listening levels, the front woofers did start to distort. One specific example is the intro to Loveland by Carolyn No, which starts with a single kick drum or synth sound offering a muted thud. I would imagine this is probably sitting in the 50 to 60 hertz territory, and a great way to find out just how much kick your speakers have. Anyhow, as I brought up the volume up to the 90 dB decibel range, the woofers were crying out for help, and the last thing that I wanted to do was damage them, so I backed off on the volume. Now, playing one track and calling it a day isn't my style, so I quickly switched gears and tried something even more demanding, which is Fading Sun off of the Winter Songs album by an artist I don't stand a chance of pronouncing. With this track, which is playing content much lower than 50 or 60 hertz, the clarities bottomed out even earlier than Loveland. Now, before it sounds like I'm throwing mud at Radiant Acoustics, let me be clear about this. Most bookshelf speakers will crumble under the pressure of these tracks at higher listening levels, and to be specific, I swapped these clarities for my reference encores, and at the same volume, the woofers were also bottoming out, and I heard a lot of port chuffing and turbulence as well. The point here, play the clarities at reasonable volume levels and you will be fine. Anything in the 80s will be safe, sound amazing, and you won't have a lick of problems with the deepest bass being thrown at these speakers. Push them into the 90s and above. Don't you dare call me complaining, because I warned you fair and square. As if you didn't guess by now, staging and imaging on the 6.2s is a cut above most speakers out there. While I did take notice that the NX Bravos that I used in a recent video would certainly give these a run for the money in this department, these things get the job done with throwing a moderately wide stage, but depth is where the NX Bravos have their number. Like I've mentioned in the Presence section, the clarities are a front row experience, especially when it comes to their upper mid-range. A lot of electric guitars tend to move forward a few steps in the sound field, and some upper harmonics in females can poke out a little bit more from time to time. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you insist on details, but also appreciate when sizzling guitars can keep their distance, it's hard to say whether or not these are the right speaker for you. Again, think of a horn-like presence in the upper midband combined with the controlled dispersion, and you will quickly catch my drift of what to expect with these speakers. While not as wide sounding as something like the Encores, which I think have a little bit of a wider dispersion pattern, the staging of the 6.2s is believable and, more important to note, controlled. Remember, folks, that AMT is indeed in a waveguide, which might save your rear end if your room isn't perfectly symmetrical. And look, it's not like they're a sleeper at throwing stuff around the room. Try Missing Limbs from Sleep Token. Side note, thank you, Alex. Also, my brother from another mother.
Fall asleep without you lying next to me.
And if that piano isn't plastered to the sidewall, completely isolated from the vocals, burn your listening room to the ground and head over to Texas. You need to hear this, because with the clarities in the sound shed, it is exactly that, and my goodness, it is freaking massive. Don't worry, I'll tell Sarah that you're coming. You can probably live in the storm shelter. Might be a little bit toasty in July, but I'll feed you all the brisket that you could ever want. Either way, imaging is pinpoint accurate, and if you're the type who likes to draw laser-like lines around every single nugget of information in the recording, you are welcome. The Clarity 6.2s do exactly that. For today's sound clips, we'll be comparing the 6.2s back-to-back with the reference recording. First, we'll play the master, and then we'll play the clarities. The speakers were recorded within a couple of feet, so you won't be hearing much of the room, nor will these clips give you much to ponder in regards to imaging and soundstage. The purpose of these clips is to help identify some of the deviations from the master clip to speaker, which gives you a rough idea on the tonal aspects and fingerprint of the loudspeaker. And with that, headphones on, let's go.
Engineer, where are you headed? Engineer, where are you headed?
No hubiera pensado que yo me iba a enamorar jamás. No quería saber nada más, nunca más. No hubiera pensado que yo me iba a enamorar jamás. No quería saber nada más, nunca más.
So one of the things that I'm going to tell you based on the clips is that the bass sounds just a bit shy, but that is certainly not how I hear it in the room. The detail and clarity is also a little truncated, and this is to be expected when we're trying to record a speaker in a room. Either way, I think the Clarities did a fine job up against the master and certainly sounds a lot like it in many of these tracks. I'm curious, what do you hear and what do you notice when you're listening? Make sure you post your comments down below. And with that, let's take a look at how these things measured. I'm going to run through these measurements quite quickly because there isn't much to complain about in this department. As we can see on access, the speaker is going to rip your head off, so don't do that. A quick comparison to a listening window at 15 degrees, which is in green, shows us that this type of response is going to be a lot easier to digest. Even more, as we take a look at the horizontal plane, you will notice that the yellow line, which is 20 degrees off axis, is pretty much flat as a pancake and was probably closer to how I personally enjoyed the 6.2s. Even still, this response is textbook with a clean and controlled follow-away in the horizontal plane. As for the vertical response, it's pretty dang good up until the green and blue line, but keep in mind that is 12 and 16 inches above the speaker moving up. And remember, they are crossing that tweeter pretty dang high, so I wasn't shocked to see a bit of a drop in the phase relationship, but all in all, this isn't anything to freak out about, and we have seen much, much worse in speakers that cost a lot more than the Clarity 6.2s. The impedance curve does show balance on both ends of the spectrum, and while I did take note of a drop down to around 2 ohms, it's so high in the bandwidth that it's not really an issue. Either way, what we're looking at here is a 4 ohm loudspeaker, 85 dB, so give it the firepower. You're going to need it with these bad boys. Now, this is where things get interesting. My spectral decay does show some potential ringing right below 2K, and if it is accurate, it's entirely possible that this is part of that front row experience that I have mentioned a lot in this review. I also noticed that right after this little blip at 2K, there is a rise in the response at 3K. So yeah, parts of vocals and upper mid-range can poke out from time to time, and I would indeed speculate that those attributes would sit right around this area in the bandwidth. Priced at $4,500 for the pair, the 6.2s do have stiff competition, and some folks might prefer snagging a tower speaker at that price point. For the folks who are fine with bass as low as 35 Hz in room, depending on wall placement of course, and appreciate a smaller stand mount speaker, the Clarity 6.2s are a no-brainer and one of the more impressive speakers that I spent time with this year. Of course, these aren't for the folks who are looking for warm butter dripping off a biscuit, but for those who like to go fast and are interested in hearing all the details that are missed in the recordings and love a front row experience when rocking out, the choice is clear, and the 6.2s are one heck of a speaker to beat in that particular category. What else can I say, folks? Denmark knows hi-fi, and Radiant Acoustics stepped up to the plate, called their shot, and they knocked this straight out of the park. And with that, I'll see you clarity-loving audiophiles in the next video.